was talking about some of the slides I've got coming up, and Matt kind of went, "Oh, you're very brave," and he's just sort of said, "Oh, here's James who's made up the numbers." Given that a lot of what I'm talking about is Windows related, and the number of people who said they were running Windows in production when the question was asked before, I'm slightly worried about whether I'm talking to the right audience here. But that's my details. It had me up as an independent contractor beforehand, so you can see email address and Twitter handle and where I blog. My background, I spent a decade working for these guys. Then I managed to end up working for these guys. I'm somewhere about here, I believe, but I am in that photo, and actually the guy in the foreground with the rather nice trophy tweeted this. So for once, I got tweeted by Lewis instead of the other way around. If you don't know anything about this company, they make some of the best high-speed advertising hoardings in the world. That's what we do. At the end of April, they had a slight rethink on the job that I was doing, with the result that I now work as modular consulting. Now, in case you don't know what a modular is, it's not quite the same as a manta ray. That was a manta ray that I met earlier in the year, but it's basically a large member of the ray family. I spend quite a lot of my time with sharks and rays, and when I find myself in an audience where not many people are Windows, I kind of feel like that guy up there. So, agenda for what I'm going to try and talk about over the next few minutes. It's going to be the classic, what was the background, what was the problem, how did we solve it, and am I any the wiser afterwards? So, the first bit of preamble. I so hoped at the end of the last talk, instead of buses, it was going to get into cars, because I have this thing that IT people, whenever they need an analogy, they go for cars. And as the analogy develops, it becomes racing cars. I need to tell you, from personal experience, that race cars are a rotten analogy for IT. For a start, we only have 2 users, and we've got, well, the number goes up and down, but about 700 people in a typical F1 team. That's a really good user to support person ratio. If you think about how often you do a major redesign, complete white sheet of paper, start again. Our 2 users use their cars for about 10 hours a race meeting. We have 20 race meetings a year. So we get about 400 hours runtime, and then we just redesign the whole thing. Going back to Windows, even Windows, you get more than 3 hours between a reboot. And 95% availability in a race car. If you think a driver has a race car that breaks down once a season, 1 race in 20, 95% uptime. Actually, 1 race a season, you take that. There aren't many places in IT where you can get away with that level of availability. But the major one is this last point. If you defer an advantage, it's an advantage lost. So every race meeting, if you follow F1, you hear that this team has brought this new part, and this engine supplier has added this, and somebody else has come up with something else. And between each meeting, we're trying to basically update the car, and then update the car again for the next meeting, and so on. So it's like lots of agile sprints between meetings. The other thing is to basically just do it. If it's legal, very important actually to Mercedes. I don't want to get too much into things between different teams, but Mercedes as a corporate brand, they could never afford to be caught cheating. Okay, certain other teams, if they're kind of out on the ragged edge, looks kind of good for certain brands, not naming any based in Milton Keynes or anything. But for Mercedes, if Mercedes got caught cheating, it really would be the end. So it has to make the car faster, not be more dangerous, be legal, and then we'll figure out how we can make it work later on. Now, occasionally this goes a bit wrong. I should perhaps add, if anybody was watching the Grand Prix at the weekend, typical IT, you can actually tell the user what to do to put their system right. We had a slight problem with that at the weekend, and possibly because something got made a bit too complicated. So, the previous talk mentioned Conway's law. The thing is, if you're a law firm or an accounting firm, the way you do IT probably reflects that kind of corporate culture. If you work in this culture, your IT probably reflects that. So there's a lot of do it and then make it work afterwards. That, if you gathered all my former colleagues together and said, what's the major problem here? And you kept drilling, eventually they'd say, it boils down to technical debt. Lots has been done in the past, and we're carrying that technical debt forward. So the starting point for this project was we had a look at Active Directory. It's very easy. You go online and you search for images of can of worms. Active Directory inside there was a real can of worms. We didn't know what we had, why certain things were there, what was right and what was wrong. It just became a nightmare. Now, being ex-Microsoft, I looked back at what I'd known at Microsoft. There they have a system called head tracks. Basically, HR puts in an update to somebody's job title, magic happens. The next thing you know, when you look somebody up in the email directory, Active Directory has been updated, new job titles there. So I basically wrote a PowerShell script to do that. That turned out to be quite a brave undertaking. But the head of HR suddenly became my best friend, because he'd never seen anything like that before. And what he was seeing was when people went to SharePoint, that was picking up information from Active Directory that his people had just put into the HR system. So we hooked up all the major internal things, which was Link, Exchange, AD, all hooked up to the database. That script ran with admin permissions. Like everything else, the easiest way to do something, just give people the tool, make them a full admin. So I have this script that runs overnight. Every night it runs as a full admin, and suddenly it dawned on me that you needed a lot less permissions to go edit the script than you needed to become an admin. So I suggested that somebody could put this little bit of PowerShell in the script. You don't have to be a great guru of PowerShell to figure out what get AD computer does, nor do you have to figure out what piping to stop computer does. I was suddenly terrified. And I was looking around me, and wherever I looked, I was seeing too much admin. So that was the idea of building a Just Enough Admin solution. Microsoft have done a lot more on Just Enough Admin since. We probably wouldn't use that even if we were building this again, because of a lot of the custom stuff that we built. But the idea was to pull together all the things I'd already mentioned, plus we were also starting to hook up with Office 365. We wanted to say, if people meet these criteria, they get an Office 365 account. And so we had to hook all those together. So this is what we were trying to do. We wanted to get rid of these scripts that were running as admin, automate a lot of the stuff that the frontline help guys were doing. They had I think it was a 37-step process for setting up a user. And I basically said, come on, we can automate that. And then their setup, by the way, didn't deal with the Office 365 and Intune bits that are on there. The other thing that we had was the guys on the help desk needed every single admin tool. And it was like, oh, this guy can't do this because he's just got a new machine and they haven't installed that on it yet. That was getting a bit too much as well. So we wanted to get rid of the need for those tools and cut back on privileged accounts for those sorts of things. Again, same coverage. And I was getting a lot of, oh, that needs PowerShell, you better go talk to James. So I wanted to try and cut down those as well. I'm not going to go through what every one of these is, but just to give you some idea of what the commands were that we ended up with, we basically grouped them into 4 columns. So turning stuff off, turning it on again, finding it, changing it, and we had it for users' mailboxes, voicemail, all the way down to setting up cloud synchronization. So this all got built as a PowerShell, what's technically in PowerShell called a constrained endpoint. Just Enough Admin is a much better name than constrained endpoint. And there are these PowerShell features, and I'll show them very quickly. I don't want to get too bogged down in demos and code, but I'll show what these are. because these are the tools that allow you to build this kind of solution. I said at the bottom, Microsoft have extended these the bits that are available. So at this point, the glasses have to go on because coming up, we've actually got a demo. So let's make sure I've got the right one first of all. So, that's a helpful thing. Thank you, PowerPoint. Let's try doing that again. And this time, we'll do it this way. So, the first thing is PowerShell's got this idea of proxy functions. So, built into the standard commands that get loaded when PowerShell starts up, you've got a command for restarting services. So I'm just going to run the command as if I was going to restart the spooler, but I'm running it with a what if switch, so it'll basically say, I was going to do this. You can see that down the bottom there. I can make the font just a little bit bigger. I was going to restart the spooler, but you ran me with the what if switch. But if I define a function with the same name, so we'll just run that to define the function, run that same command again, you can see basically it's run that command there that says no, you're not going to run this. This function has jumped in and actually got in the way of restart service. Now down here I've got another version that explicitly specifies what that command is. So now I can write what we call a proxy function that wraps around the built-in PowerShell one and gives me slightly different functionality. So one of the things that we can do is we can take the commands that we get given in a management module. Now it might be the PowerCLI module for managing VMware virtual machines, it might be the Active Directory one, it might be the Azure one, it could be anything that you manage from PowerShell, but we can take those commands, wrap them up and say, okay, you can run them but with these limitations, or possibly with these extensions. So we can say, for example, if you want to get an Active Directory user, we'll just make it really easy to search for a user by employee ID, which is quite hard actually out of the box. So that's a proxy function, and here I'm going to show you what's known as a private command. So I'm going to define a little function there called jump. Jump calls set location, and what I can tell PowerShell to do is to get set location and change its visibility and make that private. Now, CD is PowerShell's alias for set location, so let's just run CD \, and if you can read the red on blue there, it actually says the term set location, so it's unpicked the fact that it's an alias, is not recognised. So I can't run set location anymore. It's been taken away from my command line environment, but it's not vanished completely. It's because it's been made private, I can still use it from jump. So you can see my current directory at the bottom has changed. So I can start using these things to tweak the PowerShell environment. I've got a little warning here which says run this in a separate PowerShell tab. So over here I've got another instance of PowerShell on another tab, and I can ask, for example, what the current process ID is, or my current working directory, and so on. But if I go and set the language mode, first thing you notice is it breaks the prompt. The prompt's actually a background function. And now if I go back and say, what's the current working directory, or what's the process ID, just the ability to evaluate variables has been taken away from me. Right? So I've now got a really restricted area. So if I had any thoughts of going and defining a function to give me back those hidden commands, well, actually I can't do it because that's been taken away by setting the language mode. This PowerShell tab is now utterly broken, which is why I have to do this in a separate PowerShell tab. So one other thing is remote sessions. Because I haven't got lots of machines to play with here, I'm just going to get a remote session to my own machine, but I just want you to notice at the top, this PowerShell window has not got the word administrator on it, and if I try and connect to a remote session using my own machine as the place to do it, I get an error message back that basically says access is denied, no dice for you. And I think the next thing is I need to switch to my other PowerShell window, which is running as administrator. So if I scroll down to where it says switch to admin and just run that again, you can see I can get a remote session here. You see the prompt has changed to tell me the remote machine that I'm on, and again I can do all the normal things, so I can do a directory, or if I'm thinking in Unix language, I can use ls, because they're both aliases for the same PowerShell command. I've got all the normal PowerShell stuff here. This is a normal PowerShell endpoint. So if I want to do remote management with PowerShell, I don't have to get a terminal services session, I just do a remote PowerShell endpoint and start chucking commands in. To get out of that, I can just do exit, and what we can see here is there are multiple endpoints configured on this machine. Oh, that's being useful. That's a really useful error message. Well, we'll see if that works actually over in the other window. One that's not administrator. If this doesn't work, fortunately, the next piece, the next piece is actually showing you what this would have shown had it run properly. So we'll go back to the slides and pick up from there. So when we connect, there's a session configuration for that default connection. You can specify a version. When I put this together, I was using PowerShell 4. This machine's running PowerShell 5. That shouldn't matter too much. And the endpoint has a name. So by default, we connect to one called Microsoft PowerShell. I've set up one called Remote Admin, and by default, there's no startup script to set any restrictions or anything else. Here, I've got a script that does all those things that I was showing you before to create that environment that limits what the user can do. This session will run as a particular user. This user's got a set of admin rights. So effectively, we've got a full admin user here, but very, very constrained things that they can do. Normally, you just get logged on as your own user. And the last bit here, we have a set of permissions on the connection. So you can see by default, only administrators and explicitly defined remote management users can use it. Here, I've actually said anybody in the IT department can connect. And then you can use a non-privileged account to connect and do a set of very restricted things with a privileged account. So we can go anywhere, we can connect with that new PS session command, and we can just say, okay, we'll put our credentials in and we'll use a particular configuration, and then we can use this import PS session. And what import PS session does is it basically makes all the remote commands look like they're local commands. It does that temporarily. If we use export PS session, then we can basically keep coming back to that session without having to do anything particularly complicated. And I've actually got that set up as a demo for towards the end. We did a little bit of massaging of that module to make it easier for users to use. So what the script looks like, basically, we add any commands that we need from PowerShell modules and keep the commands that are added down to the absolute bare minimum. Then we use that hiding trick that I showed you to hide absolutely everything that we don't want, and then put back the things that we do want users to use. If you're not careful, this actually means that you take away things like the ability to exit from a session. So there's a minimum set of PowerShell commands that you put back in. Then we define our business logic and proxy functions. I'm amazed, I'm constantly amazed how much I can do with one line of PowerShell. Right? The script that we ended up with for this was about 2,000 lines of PowerShell. So there was an awful lot of stuff that went into the business logic and the proxy functions to implement that list of things that I showed you. And then the final thing was to set the language mode. So for completeness, if anybody wants this from the slides, that's the code for disabling unwanted commands. Not going to review that line by line. That's the command, the stuff for the minimum set of PowerShell language. There doesn't appear to be any particular way to discover this. You just go and find it online, and eventually you click with how that works, but you just cut and paste that in. And down the bottom we set the language mode. When I'm testing in the interactive environment, I don't want the all the bits taken away, so I just wrap this around in a little bit of code that says don't wrap this in, don't run this if you're running in the interactive environment. So then it was just a question of adding business logic. So proxy functions, the things to automate stuff, and overcoming a couple of issues. One is a logging issue. Since everything in that session is running with that run as account that we gave it, anything that gets logged is going to say the run as account did it. So we've lost any kind of track of what of who the user was that did it. So we had to implement logging inside the script. And we also have an issue with credentials, and PowerShell's got quite a neat trick for storing credentials, which I'll show you as well. So logging, basically one little line of code for creating a PowerShell, a Windows log, and then inside the script we can find out who the user is, and we can write to the event log something that says, for example, this user started a remote session. These last two lines here are actually the first two lines in the script that's associated with the remote admin endpoint. So in the log, this is actually a real live one from Mercedes, although I've had to scrub out some names. That you can see name scrubbed out there just on the left. Changed a particular user, Barry somebody, and they set their job title to something or other technician. We also said, well, let's try and be smart about this. So because we're doing lots of different things, we'll use different event IDs so we can see what's going on. So anything that's a 10 something, we're doing something with an Active Directory user. The two you've got up there, 102 is we changed the property, and 103 is we added them to a group. Something slightly strange with the projection here, because we've lost the Y off property, so we've lost just the edge of the screen, but never mind. And some of you will know that Windows has this issue with what they call double hop, where you go and log on to a server, and then your credentials can't be used to connect from that server to another one. Well here, because we're using that run as account, we don't have a problem with connecting to another server. So this script would actually connect to Exchange servers and go and do stuff over there, and that was all fine. We didn't have a problem with that. But when we wanted to put users onto Office 365, we actually needed a set of credentials to enter at that point. And what I've got in this next demo just shows you how this little trick with secure strings. So what I'm going to do is just exit out here, and we'll go back to this window up here. And what I can do is basically say, what I want to do is get a set of credentials for this particular user, test user. So it'll prompt me to put in a password, and when you first see this being done, so I'm going to put in the password, which is a desperately secure password, and you'll see it on the screen in a second, because this credential object has to be able to log on using clear text passwords. So the password is one of the standard ones, PA55 word. Okay. Now, if I export that to a file, I can export it to an XML file. And if I type the file back, you can see that the password's been saved as a secure string. So PA55 word isn't in there. But if I read the file back, what you see is I can read the file back, and there's the password again. Since that's actually a real live user, let's start a session for that user. Before I do that, I just want to copy these 2 lines here to the clipboard. So what I'm going to do is just start the ordinary shell version of PowerShell rather than the interactive scripting environment. If I do who am I, you can see that those credentials have logged me on as a user called test user. Yes, my computer really is called Binky if there are any Terry Pratchett fans in the audience. And I can type that file, so I've not got a problem reading the file, but only the user that wrote it can decrypt that secure string. So what we could do was we could log on as the run as account, we could save the password for logging onto Azure. We can then say, okay, that's saved, but only the run as account can read that password back. We'll come back to this shell in just a second. The other thing was just to show you how all those other bits get put together. Here's my little piece for logging. Okay, here I'm importing the commands that I actually need. So this one's actually going to allow me to see the printers that are available on this machine. A bit further down, we're going to hide everything. So this hides all executables and all scripts. We then hide internal commands, and we reveal the getPrinter command. So we make getPrinter publicly visible, and then these 2 lines here were the mystery lines for putting in the minimum bits of PowerShell. In here I've got a tiny little bit of business logic, so I've got a command to restart the spooler. And you can see I write to the event log, and I run restart service spooler right to the event log. So that all looks quite good. And then the last piece is setting the language mode. So I can actually add an endpoint. So I'm going to create a brand new endpoint using that script, and I've told it to prompt me for some credentials and to show the security descriptor UI so I can actually say people other than administrators can run this. So if I run that, this is actually going to run as me. One of the hazards of doing demos is you stand here and your mind goes a complete blank when you have to type your own password in again. I'm going to hope that this will still work. I've got a very bad feeling about what's going to come next. Because I think my demo has, at this point, decided to break on me, but we'll see. Yeah, that's actually worked. So, one of the fortunate things, because I set this up in rehearsals, I've either not cleared something down properly, or something has broken, but the thing that was there in rehearsals is still there and working for me. So basically, I've got a session to use that uses that script. So if I jump into that session, okay, and I try and, for example, get a directory, doesn't work. If I ask for my current working directory, doesn't work. I'm going to get errors. But if I go get printer, I can get the list of printers that are set up on this machine. If I do the PowerShell command get command, where normally this would go on for about page after page after page, you can see I've got that minimum set plus the 2 commands that I defined. So this is all I can do in this session. But I was talking before about exporting the session. So if I come over here, I can basically say I'm going to export that session, and it creates a new PowerShell module. Now, remember I've got my test user over here. Okay, that test user, if I try to do something like restart service through that module, and it says, that's remote, I've got to set a session up for you for that. Well, I'll set that up, and now that's come back remotely. And if I do restart Spooler, which is the other thing that I specified in there, and go and have a look in the event log, just refresh the event log, you can see that this user here restarted the Spooler. So, just to wrap up then. We created some very long commands, so to make it easier for users, we built GUI wrappers to go around them. I said there was a 38-step process for creating a user. Well, that was what initialize user looked like when we'd finished with it. Those were all the commands. So eventually we said, actually, we'll create a wrapper, and we'll make sure that if you get some data and pipe it into the wrapper, it fills in the form so the user can do it. We ended up doing a lot of pester testing. I wrote this for a longer slot, so I'm not going to go into the pester testing here. And most of the stuff that were technical lessons are the things that we've seen already. We had other people coming and asking, can you create us an endpoint for this? Can you create us an endpoint for that? Which is where stuff around DNS checks and VMware things came in. And we ended up solving most of the problems. The non-technical lessons, well, it was back to that problem of technical debt that I talked about at the start. Technical debt and persuading people that actually they did want to change. There was no way of persuading you, the IT department users, to just swap like for like, so we had to give them additional functionality, like being able to find things more easily or automating stuff. Lots of iteration going through the development, and the main thing going back to technical debt and inertia was actually around the management. I don't think management ever bought into this properly, and I don't want to come across as sounding a little bit bitter. Do you remember there used to be an old advert for a brand of Irish stout called Murphy's, and it used to go, like the Murphys, he's not bitter. Well, I'm an O'Neill, not a Murphy. But I could see that the job Mercedes had hired me for was going to basically disappear out of existence. And I thought this was my chance to morph that job into something that would allow me to carry on working there. Unfortunately, it didn't do that. They had a reshuffle, and as I say, my job went away. Had I had management who saw more value in this, who knows what might have happened. But anyway, that's kind of time up. I think, have we still got time for questions, or have I called it all up?
Time for one quick question, if anyone's got one. Okay, one just over here, quickly.
I bet it's a Formula 1 question and not a... I did notice the Max Chilton reference, by the way.
It is a sad IT question, not
Go on then.
In terms of the original problem,
Yes.
are there like a multitude of identity management tools out there that would do what you were trying to do?
No. So the problem with identity management tools is that we could always find a tool that would say you can give this person, for example, you can give this person on the help desk the ability to go and change all the 80 attributes of a bunch of users. Okay. What we couldn't do was we couldn't say this person can only change these attributes, or this person can only easily add people to these groups, or only use these templates for creating users. And the tools that we could find to do it, we always ended up coming back and saying, you end up granting an awful lot more management privilege to people than you actually want. And once you've granted them that privilege, they can find a tool that will allow them to do some extra stuff. Whereas this way is all around taking away that management privilege from them.
Cool, okay, so James, he says he's not bitter. I'll do the Formula 1 joke. Are you sure you're not bitter, given all the bad luck Lewis Hamilton's been having this year? You don't have to answer that.
No, I won't answer. It's funny, you listen, I do pay a lot of attention to, because I was a bit of a petrol head before I joined Mercedes, and I do listen to what people say. The stuff that happens to drivers within teams, you can have such fun creating conspiracy theories with it. Actually, stuff happens, most of it is quite random. And the bad luck Lewis has been having, you wait later on in the season and it goes the other way, and people will say, oh, they've done something to nobble Nico. No, it's just the way that stuff randomly plays out.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, James.